I was not put on this earth to be invisible.
Investing in women and girls isn't just the smart thing to do from a moral standpoint, but it's also the smart thing to do from an economic and a strategic standpoint.
No Ceilings focuses on advancing rights and opportunities for women and girls around the world, politically, economically, socially, and culturally.
In 1995, 189 countries came together in Beijing for the fourth World Conference on Women. We agreed to an ambitious platform for action, the full and equal participation of women in political, civil, economic, social, and cultural life. That's why we are launching No Ceilings. We want to know what we've achieved and what we have to do.
Despite great progress over the last 20 years, women remain the majority of the world's unhealthy, unfed, and unpaid.
We have to get more women behind money.
We can use new tools and partners to move toward our goal.
Data makes a huge difference in terms of where you make investments and where you can see that you're making progress and where you're not.
We are bringing together partner organizations, international institutions, governments, businesses, NGOs, and others to evaluate and share the progress for women and girls in the 20 years since the UN Fourth World Conference on Women in 1995.
We're going to begin hosting convenings just like this across the country and around the world so that we can hear directly from the girls and the women and the boys and the men about what we need and what we can do to achieve full participation for girls and women in society.
The first piece of my journey was realizing that it wasn't so strange to have this ambition.
एक लोग के सोचने से 10 लोगों के सोचने में अंतर है, इसलिए हम सब की एक सोच बड़ी सोच बने, जिससे हम लोग एक दूसरे के सहारे आगे बढ़ रहे हैं.
This is our moment to speak up loudly with our voices.
This is our moment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Terry McCullough, Director of the No Ceilings Full Participation Project.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us today for our 10th No Ceilings conversation here in Little Rock and on the live stream. The No Ceilings initiative is trying to make an evidence-based case for the full participation of women and girls here in the US and throughout the world. We're doing that by collecting data in partnership with the Gates Foundation, and next year we will put out a progress report on the status of women and girls throughout the world over the last 20 years. From there, we'll be able to celebrate the progress that we have made, we know we have, but we'll also be able to highlight some of the gaps in participation and then create a policy agenda to chart a path forward to full participation in the next 20 years so that we can benefit from the great contributions of all women and girls. We're thrilled to be with you here today because when we think about charting that path forward, we have to think about what works. And we're very excited because we are hosting this conversation, and it's exactly as it implies in the title, a conversation. We're going to be very excited to hear from some of you, but we're also going to hear from some representatives from organizations that work both here in Little Rock and throughout the world. And they're going to talk about how they have created change and they've created some community-based solutions to advance economic opportunity for women and families. So we hope that you will have some questions and some comments around that. We are thrilled to kick it off by introducing the Executive Director of the Arkansas Commission on Economic Development, Grant Tennille.
Thank you, Terry, and I want to thank you for putting this together here today. The timing couldn't be better. There have been a number of related conversations going on, gaining momentum here, and just 2 weeks ago, I participated with a number of people in this room in the presentation and roundtable discussion of 3 new studies done by the Women's Foundation of Arkansas asking lots of the same questions that No Ceilings has been asking worldwide. So it is great to be with everyone today, and incredibly wonderful to welcome Secretary Clinton and Chelsea to the stage. So many of the things that we'll be talking about today and the people who will be highlighted have really come to Arkansas, and we've seen the germination from seeds that Secretary Clinton planted many, many years ago. And we are here today to talk about how we continue that work and how we continue to bring parity, equality, and prosperity to all Arkansans. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage Secretary Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton, Vice Chair of the Clinton Foundation. Absolutely. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all, and thank you so much for being part of this 10-year anniversary for the Clinton Presidential Center, the library, and the foundation. We are thrilled to have this opportunity for you, if you haven't been here before, to see the work that is done here at the center. And if you have been here before, welcome back. This is a particularly welcome occasion for Chelsea and Bill and me and Chelsea's husband, Mark, because as you know, we just became grandparents, and she just became a mom, and Mark just became a dad. And the fact that we have a granddaughter means that we are even more focused on these issues and thinking about what the world that she will grow up in will be like for young girls and young boys, but in particular, what are the opportunities for her full participation and for the full participation of every girl and woman. Now, some people have asked me, well, why are you focusing on girls and women? Besides the fact that I was one and am one. I think it's fair to say that in our work, both our work here in Arkansas, our work when Bill was president, our work in the Clinton Foundation, and in other related activities, we have seen over and over again how important it is to open up economic opportunities for girls and women. That the absence of those opportunities, the limits on full participation, not only deprive those young women of their chances to define themselves, to make their contributions, but it also holds back societies, countries, the world. And increasingly, we have seen evidence that has been gathered in about the last 6-7 years that makes that case in very clear economic terms. Now, when I was in Beijing 20 years ago at the UN conference, a platform for action was adopted, and its goal was the full participation of girls and women in every aspect of their societies. And we've made progress on education and on health care. The Millennium Development Goals that were set by the world in 2000 have been a real spur for getting girls into primary education, which has been accomplished, not so much secondary education. For dealing with infant and maternal mortality, not enough, but progress has been made. And so you can see that there has been a concerted effort along some of the lines of purpose that were adopted in 1995. There are, however, some gaps, and one of the biggest gaps is the participation of women in the labor force, the formal labor force, I hasten to add, because women all over the world do an enormous amount of work. You see it every day, but it's not always included in what we call the formal economy. And as a result, there isn't a nation on earth that has realized what it could in economic prosperity because of those continuing barriers to women's full participation. So when I joined the foundation after leaving the State Department, Chelsea and I began talking about what we would work on together, and this was clearly at the top of the list. So the No Ceilings project is aimed to do exactly what Terry, our executive director, laid out briefly, and that is to take stock of what were the goals that were set in 1995, what has been achieved, and what are the gaps, and what are the reasons for those gaps, and what should be the agenda for the next 20 years. Our work has been informed by some of the excellent analysis that's been done by the World Bank, by the International Monetary Fund, other groups in both the public and private sector, who have pointed out that the failure to prepare women and to welcome and permit the full participation of women in their economies has very real-world effects. So that in Japan, the current Prime Minister Abe, is pushing very hard to get more women into the formal workforce. But he's faced a couple of problems. There's no child care system. The educated women, are responsible for bearing and caring for children and for caring for relatives. So how do you get more women into the workforce, even though the projection is that if you had more educated Japanese women in the workforce, you would see the GDP grow by about 9%. In other countries where women's participation starts at a very low level, it would make a big difference, raising it even some percentage points. So we're having a very interesting time trying to figure all of this out. And then to come forth with a preliminary report, our progress report, early next year, aiming for a very collaborative rollout process with the UN and others throughout 2015, leading up to the 20th anniversary of the Beijing conference. What we want to do today is to really dig into what's happening on the local level, here in Arkansas, in our country, and around the world, with people who are on the forefront of trying to figure out how you prepare girls and women to be in the economic sector, how you identify the barriers to their participation, and how you begin to not only eliminate them, but transform the workplace so that more girls and women, particularly given the age-old challenge of balancing family and work, can be able to participate moving in and out of the formal economy. And I think that we're going to hear from some terrific people going forward. But I want you to now hear from Chelsea, who is co-chairing this with me and has brought not only her own experiences, but her deep understanding of some of the different ways younger women think about this. Because I have to tell you, when I first started talking to her about it, and I said, you know, this would be a great idea. We'll do a 20-year retrospective of Beijing, and we'll throw it into the future. She kind of looked at me and she goes, you know, I don't think a lot of young women know what that means. Beijing was a long time ago. I said, don't remind me. So she has been not only my co-chair, but a very important designer of the analytics and our work going forward.
Well, I did watch my mother's speech in Beijing, but I certainly think I might be the only person I know my age who did that. And one of kind of the areas that has been a lot of fun, I think, intellectually as well as philosophically and then kind of pragmatically, is thinking about what we need to do to complement the Beijing platform, chiefly around technology. Facebook is the largest community of women in the world now, arguably. There are close to 700 million active female users of Facebook. You know, Mark Zuckerberg was still in high school when my mom went to Beijing. So, you know, it is kind of ensuring that the ethos of Beijing governs our work, ensuring that we do have a fidelity to the platform itself to assess where we have come, but complementing the platform when it perhaps would be just too anachronistic, given that it was 1995 and not kind of approaching 2015. And before we kind of move into asking some of our audience members to talk about what they've done at the local, state, national, and international levels to more effectively empower women as their own agents, just to flesh out a bit more what my mom said in terms of linking our progress report to our policy agenda. We do have a lot of data now on kind of women's economic participation and women's political participation. We have some data on women's social and cultural participation, but there's so many issues that really are fundamentally women's issues, even if they don't first appear as such. Ebola is a tragic example of this. Ebola is predominantly a caregiver's disease. Caregiving is the main mode of transmission. Women are the predominant caregivers. Women have been disproportionately affected by Ebola as victims themselves, and also bearing the burden of having lost their loved ones, because children are particularly vulnerable. So many of those who have recovered actually have recovered while having lost a family member, and most likely a child. Because Liberia's health system was already so weak, there's a hidden death toll of Ebola that has also disproportionately affected women. Maternal mortality rates have skyrocketed since June in Liberia, because so many community health workers that would have been there to attend births have been redirected to help with Ebola victims. And so what we hope to do also through No Ceilings is to kind of further underscore that every issue that each of us may individually care about is a woman's issue, is an issue that affects the future for little girls like Charlotte in the world. Ensure that although we're being guided by the Beijing platform, we're not striated by it, so that we can kind of bring in important dynamics in the 21st century, and that we are relentlessly focused on what has worked, because we do see kind of divergence in countries and even within countries in certain communities, and we want to understand why there are places where women and then consequently their daughters and their families are healthier and more productive, and where they're not, so that we can highlight those disproportionate areas of success to better then galvanize and focus our resources, our energies, and our efforts, so that in 20 years the world looks very different for Charlotte and little girls, because we've been more focused in our advocacy and our policy agenda moving forward. But we know that we need to inform all of this by what works, and sometimes that's data-driven, and sometimes it has to, by definition, be anecdotal. And we're so grateful to all of you for being here with us as part of this conversation, as my mom said. And we're particularly grateful to those who are going to kick off the conversation. And first, I'm going to call on Grant again to tell us a little bit more about his work here in Arkansas. And because I'm shameless in my appreciation of my daughter and my mother, to talk a little bit about how what you're doing today relates to what she started doing 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. And those are some of the things that we've been working on.
Thank you very much, Grant.
Well, Grant, thank you for that, because I think it's a good way to define economic development work anywhere. How do you raise per capita income? How do you give people more choices and more power over their own lives and futures? And there was one particular program that I wanted to mention. I remember in the early 1980s, after Bill was reelected and took office in 1983, it was probably like 1984, we had the chance to meet Mohammed Yunus, who some of you know started Grameen, the program for borrowing in Bangladesh that was primarily focused on women borrowing small amounts of money that they had to repay, but to enable them to invest in their own businesses, whether it was buying a milk cow or another goat, or setting up a market stall, or one case I remember very well, buying a rickshaw for her husband so that he could contribute more to the family income, whatever it might be. And I was so taken with the microcredit loan program. And through talking with Mohamed Yunus and then also working with a very close and dear longtime friend of mine, Jan Piercy, who's here today, who was working at the South Shore Development Bank in Chicago, we decided we wanted to figure out how to bring that Grameen model to Arkansas. And it led to the creation of the Southern Development Bank Corporation, which is still operating. And when it started, it was, one of a handful of such banks around the country, South Shore at that time being the primary example in Chicago, that would really work with low-income, middle-income borrowers to help them understand their business plans, if that's what they were coming to discuss with you, understand their obligations to repay loans, on what kind of schedule. So it filled a huge gap, which unfortunately I think is even bigger today than it was back in the 1980s. That, we've lost so many community banks, we've lost so many other forms of extending credit. Credit unions do a great job, but we still have so many people in this country who are unbanked. The number is enormous. What is it, Jan? 30% or something, a large number. And many of them are women. And I remember a young woman telling me about she was a baker, she wanted to expand her business, she went from bank to bank, she couldn't get any credit because she'd never had any credit. So she paid her credit cards, but she couldn't demonstrate the collateral that a real bank was looking for. And she said to me, I never realized that dreams die in the parking lots of banks. And so when we think about economic participation in our country, and we're going to get to other countries in a minute, but if we think about our country, the difficulty of getting access to credit, which has become a bigger problem than it even was 25, 30 years ago, so that people with good ideas who bring sweat equity to it, many of whom are women, are basically shut out of the business market. They can't start those small businesses. They can't hire one more employee. And doing business is now a much more challenging choice for a lot of people in Arkansas and across our country. And that has a disproportionate effect on women.
Moving to Annette Dove. Annette, I don't know where you're sitting.
Annette, come on up here, because I think it'll be easier for people to see and hear you. Why don't you talk a little bit about Annette, Chelsea, while she's on her way up?
So while Annette's making her way to stage, I had the privilege of meeting Annette a few years ago. She was my first Making a Difference segment for NBC. I really wanted to come back to Arkansas for my first Making a Difference segment. And I knew that I wanted to highlight someone whose work was not only, as the title of the segment, making a difference, would be just imminently clear to anyone, but particularly someone who was doing that for children and for families more broadly. And I was even more impressed by Annette when I met her than when I had first read about her. And I'm just so grateful for the work that she is doing in a part of our state that continues to need it so desperately. So Annette, please tell us a little bit about the model of TOPS and kind of what you're working on now that you're most excited and frustrated about.
Good evening. First of all, I want to say thank you to Chelsea because she gave us an opportunity for the world to know what we're doing. I started TOPS 13 years ago, and I started from the hippie program, and I went into homes, and I saw a lot of young women that appeared to have no hope. So I wanted to go back to my community, and we started a program, and the first thing we did was start a girls program called Changing Steps. We moved from Changing Steps, and we kept that program, but I wanted to give the girls an opportunity, so we started a job training program. We partnered with the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff Business and Economics Department, and we started a graphics store. This morning, I want to tell you, a 16-year-old girl, the coordinator is on a college tour. A 16-year-old girl went in this morning, designed a product, and produced that product for an organization by herself. A lot of our young women come from homes where grandparents are leading those homes. A lot of them do not go to college. They don't even have the idea of going to college. So we created a program called Dreams. Dreams require educating and motivating students. And what we wanted to do with that program is to help direct those young women into college fields or fields that they would not normally acknowledge. And so we did so. Right now we have 100% of our students, all except one, that attend college. They got scholarships. They're on a college tour as I'm speaking to you now. And not only that, one of our young women from a household of 17 decided she wanted to go into the Air Force. She wanted to be a pilot. Her name is Tiara. I want you to know that Tiara graduated top of her class. She is an honor guard in Washington, D.C. right now, and she's also going to school at night to become a doctor. Just outstanding. There's a number of things you can do at the level, community level. Opportunity, guided mentors, and starting early. And we start early with our children, giving them opportunities, bringing in speakers, working with the STEM program, showing them that you can do it with guidance and with help.
Thank you. I think Annette is clearly extraordinary. I'm glad that all of you agree, as demonstrated by that applause. I think part of what makes Annette so extraordinary is her determination to close what we often refer to as the imagination gap. That for so many of the young women and the girls with whom she works, they would have never known they could imagine being in the Air Force or being a doctor or a graphics designer, and that she is determined to close that imagination gap and then to help each one of the young women she works with translate that imagination into a real path forward for them. And I think we need more people like Annette doing more work like that in all of our communities around the world. And speaking of the world, Pierre, I'm sure my mother would like for you to come to stage, so please join us on stage. Pierre Ferrari runs Heifer International, which we're so grateful is our neighbor. I think it's that way, yes, that way, here in Little Rock, and even more grateful for all the work that Heifer does around the world. And Pierre, I don't know if you know this, but my grandmother, who passed away just over 3 years ago, gave me a heifer animal every year for Christmas. Did you know that?
I did know that.
You did know that. So, well, I'm sorry we couldn't
Keep
share
a list
that.
of every one of our donors.
Oh, so great. Well, maybe you can talk to us about donor management and other things too, but Heifer has a particularly special place in my heart because it was the meaning of Christmas, quite literally, for my grandmother into our family every year. So thank you for helping her feel so connected to your work and for what you do, and please tell us a little bit about Heifer.
Thank you. So I'm going to get a little geeky. I'll give you some data. So we place about something close to 1.5 million animals a year. We work with about 2 million families, mostly with women. The smallholder farmer community is mostly driven by women. They do 70% of the work, as we well know. So the question for us was how to deploy the resources that we raise through donors all over the world, but mostly in the United States, and use them effectively. And we wanted to get and become outcome driven. Use the data, find out what it is that works, what doesn't work, and we have a theory of change which drives income, assets, nutrition, all sorts of issues, primarily through community development and gender empowerment. And community development is actually driven by the gender, mostly by women. So you've got this chain of causality. And we wanted to see the work that we did through community development and the 12 cornerstones, which is sort of our ethos on how we approach community, what actually worked, what didn't work, what should we spend more money on, what should we spend less money on, what we should stop doing. So I'm going to go back to my cheat sheet here. So the fundamental piece is to mobilize women to create the space for them to act independently of, there are plenty of guys here, somewhat oppressed by the guys in some of the places where we work. And so to create that space takes an awful lot of work. So before an animal is placed, before the goat that you bought or the cow that you bought, we spend months working with the community to train them, and primarily with women. So then we start measuring stuff. We have a monitoring Global Impact monitoring system, and we measure the number of households that have control over the productive assets, which means literally control over the productive assets, let's say the animal, or perhaps a tool or something like that, influence in the decisions and use of those productive assets, and then control over the factors of production, which is the land, machinery, etc. What we have found in 1 year, given the program that we do, that we can double the participation of women in all of those things. It's very rapid, and it's not surprising when you think that the animal comes in, and of course somebody's got to take care of the animal, and it's not going to be the guys, it's going to be the women. But that opens up the door for the conversation with the men to show that the women are indeed capable of handling the assets. So there's a tremendous amount of feedback going on based on the animals being used, being made productive. Then the next area we look at for the space is decision-making power. It could very well be that the men say, okay, you take care of the cow, but I'm going to decide who buys the milk, who gets the cash for the milk, and all of that issue is very important if the women are actually going to use the returns that are available on these assets to educate their children, feed their children, clothe their children. So we look at percentage of a household and the decisions that affect women pertaining to household expenditures, children's education, number of children, group participation, their own education. Most of these women are either illiterate or innumerate, and then freedom of movement. What we have found with these projects, 14 projects with about 200,000 women, is that the increase in capacity and their control over decision-making is about 85% in 1 year. Then we get to full participation, and Terry here, the numbers aren't so good. It turns out that early on, this is 1 year data, the women get engaged very deeply into the work that has to be done, but the men protect the participation, the full participation of women in the community, okay, which is interesting. But we're now looking at projects which are a little bit older, about 18 months, 24 months. And what's very encouraging is that once the women have shown the capacity to actually generate income, the men begin to open up the space for women to actually participate in the decision of the community, which is different than the decisions for the family. And I just came back from Nepal and Sundapur, and this particular project has been functioning for 20 months. It's a goat project. There's 3,000 families involved. And the women have taken over, literally have taken over the whole production system for goats, and they have formed a cooperative. And I think part of the issue you're raising, Madam Secretary, was about the capital structures and the loan. The banking system, the lending system will be substantially more successful if the lending goes to a cooperative, even if it's 100% run by women. Okay, so what's happened in this particular village, almost 24 months out, they started with a cash inflow. I told you I was going to get geeky, but a cash inflow of about $465,000 for this particular village. Today, 24 months later, they're at $2.5 million, primarily because the women have taken over, formed a cooperative, and have basically chased out the money lenders because they were exploiting them both financially and physically. And they have set up a system where the animals are all weighed and sold properly, and the chain that actually takes the animals from the farm all the way to Kathmandu in this case is actually run by women. So the whole system has been gendered, has been flipped on its head. And that's what we're hoping with the other project. But we're going to be tracking this on a 6-month basis, and we will be happy to share the data. But that's what's going on.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Thank you. You know, the Heifer Project.
That's why data matters.
Yeah, data matters because you've got to learn what works. You've got to be willing to let go of what doesn't work. And you have to have that sense of accountability and experimentation, no matter what the enterprise is. And it's important that Heifer is really charting that. And as Chelsea said, I mean, Heifer's been a favorite of our family for many, many years. And I don't know. I don't know if your gift shop is open, but if it is, so if you want to, you can go to the gift shop at Heifer and contribute to their excellent program. But I was going to say that there's a wonderful book. I actually did the foreword for it because I've been involved in supporting Heifer for so long, called Beatrice's Goat. And some of you may know this book, and we'll read it to Charlotte when she's a little older. But Beatrice was a young girl in Uganda when Heifer came to her part of Uganda with the offer that goats would be made available to families as long as they went through the training. They had to learn how to care for the goat. They had to learn how to make decisions about what to do with the goat milk and on and on. And Beatrice, as a girl in the family, became the person responsible for the goat. And so she learned responsibility, and she demonstrated great acuity in dealing with the goat. And they got another goat because they were making money. And then she went on with her education, and she was identified by some people from the United States with her talent, all of which really came to the forefront because of her work with this goat. And she was sent to school in the United States, then she went to college, she interned in my office in the Senate, and it's one of these sort of stories that you can follow from the beginning to the end. So even with all the data, which we need because that should drive decisions, they're wonderful human interest stories. And oh yes, I forgot that part, great part. Then Beatrice ended up coming to the Clinton School, where she has graduated with a master's in public service, which is the only program of its kind in the world. So from this little village in Uganda to the United States, ending up at the Clinton School, and Heifer has had that capacity. But the final thing I wanted to say, which is sort of underscore the point that Pierre was making, when I visited Bangladesh, when I visited Nepal, when I visited India, when I visited self-help groups, very often the two biggest problems that women faced for their full participation were, yes, their husbands, and the cultural sort of impediments, even prohibitions against women leaving their homes, women being in the marketplace, women being independent. And then in many cultures, particularly in South Asia, it was the mother-in-law. Because when the marriage happened, the wife comes and lives in the house of her husband and does all the work. And so the mother-in-law doesn't want to lose the unpaid service that the new wife provides. And so again, they are in lockstep with the husband. They don't want the young woman outside. And oftentimes what it takes is a lot of very careful, persistent work to try to break through those barriers. And in several instances that I know personally about, the husband gets injured. And where are they going to get the income? Then all of a sudden, okay, they will join the self-help group, or they will work with the Heifer group, or they will be part of some other program. So it's a slow but steady move forward, and we have enough evidence now to know that it really makes a difference.
And I think, just building on what my mom was saying, sort of the impediments of mother-in-laws, and I'm thrilled that I get along with my mother-in-law and that my husband, thankfully, has a great relationship with my mother. But on a somber note, I mean, one of the kind of factors pointed to as not even a correlative one, but a causal one with the recent tragic deaths due to botched forced sterilizations in India was the mother-in-laws kind of continuing to expect that their daughter-in-laws would get sterilized once they had had whatever the expected quota of children was. And it varied sons, varied family by family. In some it was 2 sons, and some it was 3 sons. And so kind of based on the idiosyncrasies of families, then these young women, all of the victims were younger than I am. They were all in their 20s, some of whom had already had 6 or 7, 8 children, but they'd had the requisite 2 or 3 or 4 sons. And from some of just the early reporting and kind of analysis that the Gates Foundation has supported in an emergency capacity, it is the mother-in-laws who are being pointed to as kind of having put so much pressure on their daughter-in-laws to go in to make what unfortunately proved to be a fatal decision. So clearly, kind of again, women in an unexpected way being at the root cause of a health issue. So thinking about health and now moving back here to Arkansas. Anna's, I don't know where you, Anna Strong. So please come to stage. Let's just continue I think my mom was, not surprisingly, absolutely right. It's probably easier to hear and see our speakers when they join us on stage. Anna is the Executive Director of Child Advocacy and Public Health at Arkansas Children's Hospital, a place that has a very special place in our family's hearts because I was a patient there when I was a little girl and they took excellent care of me. So Anna, thank you for that, and please share with us about your work at the Arkansas Children's Hospital.
Well, thank you for having me today. So part of my job is to oversee what the hospital is doing out in the community to make sure that as children are coming to the hospital for care, that what's happening in their home and their family is also supporting the health of a child. I wanted to speak briefly about two programs today. The first is a program, HIPPY, or Home Instruction for Parents of Preschool Youngsters, which Annette mentioned as well, which Secretary Clinton was very instrumental in bringing to the state back in the 80s and actually housing the state office at Arkansas Children's Hospital. That program works with these at-risk moms, and they are able to do peer-to-peer. They're women from their community who've been trained to help those moms be their child's first teacher. And so those children are able to go out into school learning and at the academic level of their peers. And actually, HIPPY's been shown to result in those kids doing better on standardized tests throughout their school. So that's a great program that's really helping those at-risk families in the community where they are. One other program that would be that I need to mention is our investment in the Franklin Elementary School-Based Health Center. That program is a school right in Children's Hospital's backyard, and it is that program. We actually support a nurse practitioner who is in that school, and she provides care to the kids. And it's a really simple concept, bringing the care to the kids rather than having the children come to the hospital. And that allows the kids to stay in the classroom, and they're there learning where they should be learning. And it also allows those moms, especially the parents who don't have paid sick time at their work, to be able to stay at work and continue their employment to support their family. And lastly, I just want to mention that we've not done any of this work. We don't do any of this work in the community alone. Mrs. Beebe's actually been very supportive of the Natural Wonders Partnership Council, which is a collaborative that the hospital has started, and it brings leaders from a couple dozen organizations together. We gather around the table one Friday morning a month at 7:30 a.m., and we are able to talk about what we're doing together to improve the health and well-being of kids and their families here in Arkansas. And that is a wonderful program that one of the great members of that is Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families, which is actually where I worked prior to coming to the hospital. And Secretary Clinton was also a founder of that organization. And they work to support the kind of policies that support the programs like the ones I mentioned today, like HIPPY and the Franklin Elementary School-Based Health Clinic. So we do all this together, and that collaborative is really helping us to take some of these programs statewide and to take those programs from being one program that's helping one group of people in one community to something that is really reaching around our state and is a structure that's put in place to help those kids and families. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much, Anna. And I want to welcome Ginger Beebe, the First Lady of Arkansas, who has spearheaded not only what you heard Anna talking about, but so many other really important initiatives on behalf of the families of Arkansas. And she and her husband, the outgoing governor, Mike Beebe, have just been extraordinary leaders for the state. I just want to make two quick points. One, the HIPPY program, which Anna mentioned, which I discovered totally serendipitously and learned about from a newspaper article, was designed and implemented in Israel. and it met a need in Israel. The need was with the influx of refugees, primarily from North Africa and particularly from Ethiopia. A lot of the Jews who were fleeing persecution in those countries were coming to Israel, and their mothers were illiterate. And the problems that the Israeli school system was seeing, because they have an excellent school system, high standards, was that the children who were coming in, despite efforts starting once they came into school, were just not doing well. And they studied it, and they figured out that they were missing this crucial window before school, the 0 to 5 period. And JB and MK Pritzker, who are great philanthropists from Chicago who fund a lot of preschool work. So what they concluded was that it was really important to empower the mother. Now, we shouldn't have to keep learning this, but the fact is, empowering the mother to educate the child is the best investment you can make in giving that child a good educational foundation. And so the Hippie program had proven success in Israel, so I called up the person who started it, Avima Lombard, Dr. Lombard, who was working at Hebrew University. I said, hi, I'm the First Lady of Arkansas, and she goes, what, where? And I said, yeah, we'd like to bring you to Arkansas to show us how to do this Hippie program. She goes, where is Arkansas? And I said, well, look at a map, and if you go down the Mississippi, it's kind of, depending, if you're coming down, you take a right turn. If you're coming up, you take a left turn. But we got her here, and we were able to implement that program in Arkansas, and we were able to work to have it started in a couple of other places around the country. And as Anna said, it was housed at the Children's Hospital. There's just been a rigorous research analysis about the Hippie outcomes, and as Anna said, it's proven very successful. And one of the reasons that it has proven successful is because it builds the self-esteem and the confidence of the mother. When you say to a mother, we want you to teach your child, if that mother is illiterate, doesn't speak English, had a bad experience in school, their attitude is, that's not my job, that's the school's job. I'm gonna, make sure my baby's, clean and fed and housed, but somebody else is gonna have to teach. I'm not able to do that. So as you begin to convince that mother that yes, you are, and here are some things that you can do right now, it builds the confidence. So we had so many mothers who would go get their GEDs and even go on to higher education because of that simple, what sounds simple, interaction on behalf of their child. And then the second thing I wanted to just underscore is this Franklin Elementary program. I actually tutored for a while at Franklin Elementary because it's behind the state capitol as well as by the Children's Hospital. And a lot of then, and I guess even now, poor kids were attending there. And because we've taken nurses out of schools, because we no longer have the kind of on-site health care that poor kids particularly need, we miss a lot of problems, and those problems don't get solved. We don't find out kids can't hear. We don't find out that kids can't see, and that's just a simple thing. And when you do surveys about what interferes with kids' learning, the first thing you should look at is how healthy they are and whether there are problems with them being able to learn and participate in school. So we have to start thinking about how we try to get health services back into schools and to take care of those problems right where the kids are. So I'm very grateful that Anna was able to give us that report.
Thank you, Anna. And now Ruth Ann Hill. I don't know, Ruth Ann, where you are, but please join us on stage. The Executive Director of the Arkansas Single Parent Scholarship Fund, something else that my mom helped start. That this was not the theme as we organized.
But we're also glad to be here to give you these updates and to thank you. So the Arkansas Single Parent Scholarship Fund believes wholeheartedly in the transformative power of education. Now, we focus our work on single-parent families because such a high percentage of them live in poverty, especially in Arkansas, and believe it or not, that encompasses a third or more of our state's children are growing up in poverty today. Now, we know that education gives these families a path out of poverty. And we work with a wide variety of students. I'll give you some examples from Liz. Liz, I had the good fortune to meet this week. We were doing an interview for KUAF, and she was one of the local students that came. Liz was fully prepared for college. She had a few years in college before she dropped out, had 4 kids. Life happens. Now she has 4 kids and is not married, and she needs to get back to school to finish her degree and provide a better standard of living for her family. And then we have Amanda, who was terrified of going to school because she's the first in her family ever to go to college. And so there were different needs there. And then Holly, who grew up in a world very different from the world many of us grew up in, a world full of addiction and abuse and neglect. And she started raising her own son in that world before she knew, motivated by her child, I've got to make a change for me and for him. So now back from when we started back in the day, I think it was 7 or 8 scholarships a year worth $150 to $200. We give out about 2,500 scholarships a year. Since we started in 1990, we've given out 35,000 scholarships worth direct investment of, thank you, on behalf of all of our students, I thank you. And that's a direct investment of about $22 million. Now, of course, that money gets spent time and time again and causes our students to get these jobs and graduate and earn incomes. And so it's got a huge economic impact in the state. And we literally can brag on thousands of professionals throughout Arkansas, doctors, lawyers, nurses, teachers, social workers, engineers, you name it. There's somebody in Arkansas now doing that job who got their initial degree or professional certificate with the help of a single parent scholarship fund. Now, we talk about scalability. We know that our program is scalable because we started from 2 single county scholarship funds in the most affluent corner of Arkansas. Well, we've grown the program over the years, and now we have 62 single parent scholarship funds providing scholarships in all 75 counties of Arkansas every single year. And, yeah, thank you. And we do this through a base of community volunteers in every scholarship fund that recruit the students that award the scholarships and that support these students on their mission through school and support the children as well. We also have 5 groups outside of Arkansas in different states that have created a model like ours in their own community to serve the single parents there and raise these families out of poverty. So right now, I would say that our internal conversations are very much about capacity building. How do we continue to grow, especially the smaller affiliates, and how do we strengthen them so that we have strong single-parent affiliate organizations in even the most rural, most impoverished parts of Arkansas? So that's an internal conversation. At the state level, the conversation is how do we magnify this work? How do we get together with the economic development people, workforce, the poverty, the Hunger Alliance, the Women's Foundation, all of these groups that have a piece of this jigsaw puzzle so that we can make a permanent dent on poverty in Arkansas and also at the same time raise the educational level of Arkansans. So that's what we're working on.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Ruthann. You know, one of the reasons that we started the Single Parent Scholarship Fund is self-evident, that there were a lot of single parents who either couldn't afford to go to school, either for a degree or a certificate, or who had started and ran into problems, very often financial problems. And the original idea was that we would be more flexible than many scholarships, because what I found, I taught at the law school up in Fayetteville for a few years, and so I encountered a lot of the students who were having these kinds of problems. And what we wanted to do was to say that we would be broad enough initially that if the reason why you had to drop out of school was because your car broke down and you didn't have the money to get it fixed, and therefore you couldn't get to school, we would give you money to get it fixed. I mean, so we started with a very broad base of trying to really meet people, meet these single parents, vast majority of them were women, where they were living, to try to empower them and give them something that would get them through a rough patch. This is a definitely scalable program, and it can be, frankly, exported from Arkansas anywhere in the country. But I think running through the speakers you've heard, you know, raising per capita income, looking at community kinds of solutions and supporting those, I think is really critical. Trying to figure out where you house and institutionalize programs, coming up with resources that are flexible, that can help young women avoid some of the pitfalls that they face, whether it's, you know, their mother-in-law in Asia or their broken car in the United States. All of that has to fit together, and there's no single formula for trying to enhance the full participation of girls and women. It varies from place to place, even in our own country, and certainly it does around the world. But as you've heard Chelsea say, trying to be really rigorous about what works. And we've shown you programs today that do work. You know, so when people get discouraged and they say, well, you know, it's just too hard, nothing works, that's just not true. And what we're going to try to do as we move forward with the No Ceilings data analysis is to point to what has worked and what can work, and some of the new ways of trying to connect people up so that more girls and women can have those opportunities.
And just building on what my mom said, I think, you know, kind of having points of optimism to really draw on that are backed by rigorous data are hugely important, because cynicism is a very potent force, and I personally think that cynicism is sort of the great sort of reserve of those who want to protect the status quo. And so kind of having optimism that is, you know, not ephemeral, but is really backed by the data and by the stories that you've heard today. I mean, even just thinking about kind of what Ruth Ann was saying, for the thousands of single parents who have been empowered through the work of the Single Parent Scholarship Fund, and then kind of magnifying that, multiplying that by all of the children's lives who were improved, I think is such a potent and important antidote to cynicism. We want to open the conversation now to all of you here with us today, to either ask questions about No Ceilings, or to ask questions of all of the people who have joined us on stage. They can come back on stage, or they can answer from their seats. But please, kind of questions, thoughts, comments. Yes, sir, in the back.
It's Dana Marshall, and I do remember your speech. I'm old enough to, for sure. I actually served in President Clinton's White House as an international economic policy advisor. This has been to me a tremendous eye-opener to see all of these programs. The point, though, that I wanted to make, just sort of one other angle to look at as we look at expanding opportunities for women, looking especially focused on women in the United States, is the international economic arena. To give a very small example, we don't have Fred Hochberg here, the head of Exim Bank, but if he were here, I think he could report that last fiscal year they supported $2 billion of American exports from women and minority-owned firms. That's a lot of jobs. A lot more can be done. A lot more should be done to expand the opportunities there, and also to look at the problems in our international economy. These, I think, this is one of these tides that can either lift or sort of sink boats. So I would encourage, along with all of this breathtaking work that has been described briefly this afternoon, to look at some of those issues as well, and perhaps in your study tour that you've announced, some of these issues could be joined in the great work that you're doing here focused on women and girls issues. Thank you.
That's a very good point, Ann. I mean, obviously, the international economy has implications for job creation, job retention, business starts business growth in our country as it does in every other country. And I think one of the challenges that we are facing now is to really analyze what works in the international economy. And thank you for mentioning the Exim Bank, because I am a very strong supporter of the Exim Bank, because it is a tool for us to be competitive in order to support our own businesses exporting. But there are those who wish to end the role of the Export-Import Bank, and it's not based on evidence, it's based on ideology. And that is unfortunately, that is unfortunately part of the struggle that we're in. And it's not just in our country, there are other places as well, but I think we know best what is happening here. If somebody comes with an economic proposal or program, they should have to come up with the evidence about what works in order to either promote it or end it. And that has to be part of the political dialogue. We cannot be competitive economically globally if we are engaged in a ideological discussion instead of an evidence-based economic discussion. So I think that's a good reminder.
Other questions? Oh, yes.
I have a question. I'm Mary McLaughlin, and I work internationally. And our organization is called Trees That Feed. We plant food-producing trees in Haiti, in Africa, in Jamaica, where I'm from. Each tree, when mature, in about 3 years, will produce 200 fruit per year. The fruit can be eaten fresh, or it can be converted into flour, a gluten-free flour. So already from the first trees that we planted, we're now feeding from the fruit about 1,000 children a day. Most of our trees go to women. So the woman owns a tree, she owns the fruit from the tree, she can feed her kids, send her kids to school, and sells them in the market. It's interesting, but last week I had a conversation with Heifer, their representative in Haiti, and we offered them trees. Because some people eat meat and some are vegetarians. So we have an option here. So thanks for the opportunity.
Well, I want to just chime in support of Mary and the Trees That Feed Foundation. If you're interested in this really exciting model, please try to find Mary, because this is a perfect example of a sustainable, environmentally friendly way of feeding more people by planting the breadfruit trees and then harvesting them and using them. So I'm so happy you stood up and talked about that, Mary. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you. Capricia, I almost called on you. Yes, why don't we, I think there's 3 or 4 hands. Please, 4 hands that I see. Okay. And then, but please ask your questions.
And why don't we take all 4 questions and
yes,
then we'll answer all 4 questions. So the 4 people who had their hands up back there. Okay, good.
Hi. I'm so grateful to this great country. I think I'm from China, grew up in China, and spent my 18 years. And I think I was, the first time I met Hillary is right after she went to the Women's Conference in Beijing. And I personally told her that as a Chinese woman and as the generation from the June 4th, 1989, and I want everyone in this room to know, in this world, there are billions of people still don't have the right to vote. That's why I'm so involved in the Clinton Foundation as a volunteer ambassador, and I just want to send this message to the rest of the world. Don't give up, even though you are in the dark, like the poor daughter-in-laws in South Asia. And I hope America is not, it's just like when Secretary of State Hillary, when she first came to the office, she went to Asia, the first stop. I think that's the greatest thing
to send a message to the rest of the world, and people are not alone. They have hopes, especially children and especially girls. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'm married to, my wife was very, very smart, and I've always been an advocate of actually women being smarter than men. And I think the root of the problem with a lot of women not succeeding is confidence, and that's where it has to start. And I think families and loved ones have to work together to give women confidence. There's a celebrity I'm very fond of. Her name is Danica McKellar. I don't know if you ever remember her from the Wonder Years, but she's an advocate of women exceeding in math, and she writes books for young girls to read to build their confidence. Because when she was in high school, she had a math teacher to put her down, and she didn't succeed in math for that reason. And math is a good building block for building confidence, and that's where it needs to start. So hook up with her.
Okay, thank you. And then
the young man behind.
Yeah, the young man in the, yeah, there you go.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here. I've been a huge fan of the Clintons for years, and I appreciate the work you're doing for women here in America and around the world. I am from Zambia. I live in Pennsylvania, but I'm from Zambia. So I'm speaking on behalf of Zambian women. First of all, I'm proud to say that the Zambian government over the last few years has adopted an active policy of promoting women in the formal sector. So women are preferred. When government jobs are applied, they actually do state that anyone is welcome to apply, but they would prefer women. So I'm very happy to report that. But there is still very high unemployment. That means that I also have to look at the informal sector. And I think I might be onto something. I've been learning a lot. I've been attending these type of events, trying to get as many ideas as I can. And just 2 weeks ago, I was in Chicago. They had a Pack Expo International event there, and it was about packaging. And the reason I attended that event is I wanted to see if I could get any ideas on how I could transfer some of that knowledge to small-scale female entrepreneurs in Zambia. Because they do produce stuff, like foodstuffs. And some of that stuff they produce is for the export market in the region. And I feel that if they can improve on their packaging, that can make them a little bit more competitive in the regional market. So that's one thing I'm looking at. In fact, I was very impressed when I was downstairs. I was doing a little bit of shopping, and I bought a bracelet. It's made in Zambia. And I was very happy to see this. So, so really what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find women who've got some kind of craft skills in Zambia. And I'm trying to say, I've been making connections. I've been telling my young sister back in Zambia that if you know women who have got certain skills, whether it's in textile or handicrafts, let me know, because I'm trying to create a niche market here, a market where I could see if people would be interested in that kind of stuff. And that helps them because they can supply it and I can market it for them here. And if anybody wants to share my idea, they could do they could do the same.
Oh, very good. I hope so. I hope some of our people from the foundation will track you down and see whether we can. Grant wants to talk to. Oh, Grant, yeah.
Great.
Stand still.
Okay.
Stand still. Don't go anywhere.
All right.
So I think we have to wrap it up. I think the young man in the suit had his hand up right there, and so he's the fourth person we saw. So go right ahead.
Thank you. If there is somebody who wants to say anything, I'm willing to give up my chance. No? Okay.
I have to. I started my 52nd year as a teacher this year. So I want to teach you a little bit. I just finished a grant at the University of Texas with 4-year-olds and how much they can learn in science. And they can learn a lot. And I had Spanish immersion classes where all the kids spoke only Spanish. And they can learn a lot. And we're talking about all you foundations. Where in the hell is government? They should be in school. They should be providing school. They're doing half-day daycare. 6% of a huge business in STEM jobs goes to Hispanics and black total. 6% is all that's in STEM. That includes engineers and doctors and all of that. 30% are women. If you don't start when they're 4 years old or 3 years old, you're not going to get them when they're 19, okay? So you've got to put the pressure on the government to provide money for those kids to get a start, especially in the poverty homes. They don't know, they have no models. Nothing you can do can teach them to add and subtract and do that unless it comes through the school. Okay, thank you for letting me interrupt.
Thank you. Thank you for your dedication to teaching, too. Well, you can see this could be a very lively session, and that means we probably need to do this again and have even more opportunity to hear from people with their ideas, their questions, and everything else that's on your mind. We're going to have to wrap this up now, but I just want to encourage you to follow the work that we're doing with No Ceilings. Terry and her team at the foundation can keep you informed. Obviously, you can follow what we're doing online. But in the next few months, we're going to be laying out the preliminary results of our analysis so that we can get to the point where we have a much better idea of what works and how to do more of it.
And I would just say, particularly if there are organizations that you have worked in, governments that you have worked in, private businesses that you have worked in, or that you know of who really have made a positive difference in the areas that we've talked about, whether it be kind of the economic, the social, the cultural, or the political participation of women and of girls, please share them, because we know that people pay attention to kind of what we highlight. And so we want to make sure that we are highlighting as much of what works as is possible. So please continue to think about and talk about these issues. Please share your questions, your thoughts, and your ideas with us, but particularly please give us the examples that you know of through your own work or what you yourself have been a part of for what truly does make a difference.
We'll see you tonight at the concert.
Thank you very much.